Welcome to episode 10 of the Liminal Space podcast. This is Tristan.
This is Rashid.
So this is our first time recording in 2025.
It is.
Last year was a month ago.
Yeah. It feels like it was way longer.
Rashid, don't tell your joke. Don't be that person.
Nah, it feels like it was long ago.
So we recorded a month ago. We are going to continue speaking about our theme for this season, which is about stories and systems change. And we're posing it as a question. Can stories change
systems? Exactly.
And to do that, we acknowledge firstly the complexity of systems, which is something we'll speak about today, I think.
Yeah.
How complex systems are, which means that the work we need to do maybe is also complex.
Yeah.
But then we're also considering what role stories and narrative and maybe even art in a general sense plays in doing that.
Absolutely.
And so we have a very cool guest that is with us today.
Ncedisa is an African-centered systems change and field learning partner. That is to say, she teaches systems change. She helps organizations apply systems change to their strategies, and she partners with any collectives that are committed to discovering organizational well-being. She was the inaugural Director of Bertha House, where she founded Twos and Fours, a video music series that draws on African musical production to foster post-activism in South Africa's social justice sector. In her spare time, she rollerblades, cycles, and plays music, always guided by Dr Toni Morrison's words, "The function of freedom is to free someone else." Ncedisa holds an abiding curiosity and faith in the power of narratives as stewards of possibility. You're very welcome, Ncedisa.
Thank you so much to both of you. It's cool to be here.
Yeah, lovely to have you.
We're excited to have you. I think you and I met by chance and then realized we knew some people in common, key among which is Leanne Brady. Shout out to Dr. Leanne Brady, who's a very cool human being.
Shout out Brady.
And I think we connected via Leanne as well, and found out that we actually live on the same street, or you used to live on the same street that I live on.
Yeah.
At some point, but our paths never crossed. So that's cool. And the other thing was that you spent some time in East London growing up. And I always like to mention that I'm from East London. So that's another cool connecting point that we had.
Yeah. I mean, I'm originally from Mthatha.
Yeah, just
but
get
East
the story
London,
straight. Yeah.
I mean, I just... But East London is home now. Yeah.
That's brilliant. So when we asked you about coming to the podcast, you were excited, I think is fair to say, because of the name. You told us a story about the liminal space, or the idea of liminality even. That was something that you had been thinking about and speaking about in the past. And so maybe I thought you'd maybe start there and tell us about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because I said to you, what is the name of the podcast? And you said the Liminal Space Podcast. And then I just kind of lit up. And I said, I live for liminal spaces. I understand a liminal space to be that space on the other side of reality that kind of connects with imagination, with what is not real. So what really excites me about a liminal space is that it's that space you can step into and in so doing connect with what is possible. Yeah.
That sounds like what Rashid talks about all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you stealing my words? So what's happening?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, and just as another starting point, we also like to often just ground the conversations in location. We're at my house today in Claremont for some practical reasons. Your neighbors were going to be loud today, but you stay pretty close to...
I'm also in Claremont.
You're also in Claremont,
yeah.
You stay pretty close here.
Yeah.
The first thing you said when you came here was, I said, "Hi, Ncedisa, how are you?" You said, "You're suburbia, eh?" I was like, yeah. Perhaps just to share a little about your experience in Claremont, how you got here. I think maybe even reflecting on its connection with the rest of Cape Town, or something like that.
Yeah, look, I think why I had to remark, it's just that as someone who grew up in Mthatha, as a kid who grew up in Mthatha and then came to Cape Town for university, I never imagined myself living in Cape Town in a way where I go, okay, this is where home is. And certainly not Claremont. Claremont almost was like too nice for me, you know. So that's why for me, even though I live in Claremont, I'm like, wow, this is weird, this is surreal. And then, of course, as a space where even before I moved to Claremont, I was like, do I want to do that? Because there's a space of forced removals as well. I was like, ish, now I'm coming here from this side, and what does it mean? And actually, it was Brady who was like, yeah, maybe it's, a way of the land being given back.
Yeah. The other question we ask guests is about what stories ground you? What stories helps you navigate the world?
So yeah, I've been thinking about this. It is any story that has that theme of coming home to self. And another way of saying that is it's any story that kind of rehumanizes us as well, because that's a form of coming home to self. So I don't mean like self as in like ego self, but just self in terms of, I'm a being that carries gifts, that is, I don't know, whatever faith you might be, but isn't somehow connected to the divine. And we live in a time that kind of makes us forget that all the time. So stories that remind me, that rehumanize me when I bear witness to others coming home to self, are very grounding, because it reminds me that, okay, cool, like I too can be this audacious. And again, I mean audacious not in a way that is entitled or whatever negative connotations we have with audacious, but like I too can be so audacious as to act from a point of belief and remembering that I too am connected to the divine. I too am part of the unity consciousness. I too have a gift to bring to the world. Those are the stories that ground me.
Can you think of like an anecdote from your life or someone else's life that illustrates that in a way?
Yeah. For me, those stories I get from music, from a poem. Yeah, music carries a story. A poem carries a story. Even a quote carries a story. Like the function of freedom is to free others. There's a story there, guys, As a kid, I used to listen to all sorts of music because I grew up in a context where my mother had a gramophone, and that's what it was called. It wasn't like, it wasn't vinyl. What is vinyl?
It's vinyl, yeah.
So there was a gramophone, and there was jazz, and there was African music, and there was Julio Iglesias, and there was country music. Enrique's dad, exactly.
That one, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm showing my age. And it was when Julio was singing, where I remember her saying to me one day when I was really young, and she was like, music has this power. You don't necessarily have to understand the exact words. So don't worry about that. If the music speaks to you, and that stayed with me. So as a kid, I grew up listening to too many different genres of music, even the genres that I was a little bit shy to be listening to. Like I was the black kid who was listening to white music. You know what I'm saying? And one of the people I listened to a lot was Tori Amos, like that heyday of, I guess, the post-70s. So in the States, in the 70s, there was a lot of kind of reforms that happened where like money was redirected away from the arts and to other things, right? So I really used to listen to the musicians who were moving from that kind of point of resistance against that, or trying to, people who were filling the gap. Anyway, so Tori Amos kind of fell into that for me, and she had this song, I don't actually even know the title of it, but there was this line that said, she's been everybody else's girl, maybe one day she'll be her own. And I always really liked that line. That's the other thing, I don't really listen to song words immediately, but that one kind of jumped out at me. And I remember a time when I would have been about 23, and I was doing a postgraduate degree, and the story in that song really kind of did me a beautiful service. I think that to this day I look back and I'm like, yeah. And the context was that I was on scholarship at the university, which meant that my tuition was paid for, and then for my living expenses I had to work a whole bunch of hours in a research center. And very quickly, I started to see that the research center was not aligned with, I guess, my politics. I was studying a research psychology degree looking at critical thinking, community development, and natural resource management. So there was very particular kind of politics that was informing me being here, and the research center was not aligned in that. And in fact, there was just, there was just casual racism. So my discomfort, I ignored it for a while because it was also my only livelihood, right? But it reached a point where I couldn't ignore it. I was being asked to take part in a research study that, when I looked at it, the very tool that was being used was going to set up the results that could then, I think, be weaponized against black men, right? And when I raised that with also, and I said, we can create a tool. We don't have to use a tool that's been used in Europe in the 70s, we can build a tool that is contextual. And actually, I have just the person we can work with, who was an academic who was based at UCT, who had supervised me in my previous thesis. So like, I came with a solution, and that got ignored. And the ignoring was, okay, cool, can you translate the questionnaire into Xhosa? So I kind of found myself at a point where I was like, if I continue, I feel like I'm colluding with something that is not, with something Afrophobic, racist. And one of the things that really got me to kind of make the decision to effectively step away from the scholarship, which is what I did, was that line coming back to me. That line from Tori Amos saying, she's been everybody else's girl. Maybe one day she'll be her own. When I heard that line, it was very clear to me that what I had to do was to ground into a truth, into the truth that I was seeing, and say no to the reward of being complicit with what, as I say, I thought was just racist academics.
That's profound.
I mean, look, I'm profound.
I'm just thinking about how right now there are people facing that kind of ethical dilemma.
I think we face that dilemma almost so regularly. I was going to say almost every day, but we face it really, really regularly. And I think to a certain extent, we sometimes desensitize ourselves so that we can show up for life and work and all of that type of stuff. But what I love about music and the stories and the narratives that are there is that they are there to remind us, so that when it is that moment where it's like, okay, actually, I cannot collude with this, we can connect in with the courage and the truth to kind of do what is in service to, a more forgiving, loving, humanizing way. The collusion thing, I'm saying no to the reward of colluding with something that's Afrophobic. I think it's not necessarily the Afrophobia part of it, it's the dehumanizing part of it. We live in systems that dehumanize us.
Yes, absolutely.
Effortlessly. Absolutely effortlessly. And it's those stories that help us remember to disrupt that for me plays such a beautiful, beautiful service to us.
The idea you're speaking about is, one way you could define it is collusion with whiteness, maybe even white supremacy or something. But that how you as a black woman could actually find rewards from that. And I mean that in like the individualistic, perhaps self-centered way. But then if you recognize that no, but you're also part of a system, you mentioned in that example, the people at the brunt of it would be black men based on how it was set up and what they would probably lead to. I'm just interested in that idea, maybe for people of color, when there's this idea that proximity to whiteness, or whether it's to power, it can be in, if we're talking about systems, there can be various examples of power in those systems. And perhaps engaging with that tension of reward versus, you know what, like, I'm not just an individual, I'm also part of people. Even those ideas you were speaking about earlier about home, coming back to yourself, I know from some conversation that we had before, I guess part of that idea of home is also a collective idea of home. So I was just wondering your reflections on that.
So for one, I don't have to be white to collude with whiteness. I don't have to be a man to collude with patriarchy. I don't have to be, okay, you follow the pattern. And I hope this is answering your question, but this is what I was thinking as I was listening to you. I think systems have a power to wield the outcome of any moment that you and I interact. The systems that we live in. They have the power to determine the outcome of our every interaction. And they wield that power by just drip feeding, rewards. So for me, whiteness might reward me for speaking English like I do. Ish, guys, I went to an expensive school to get this expensive English. My parents knew that it would help me kind of try and subvert an oppressive system. So they drip feed, these systems drip feed these little rewards so that at that moment of interaction where the outcome can either further bolster the system or the outcome can insert something new that disrupts the system, those little rewards are at play already. And they kind of determine the outcome if we're asleep. I don't know if that's answering your question.
What's interesting for me is the thing about the waking up to that reality. So in your case, the Tori Amos song causing or influencing your liberation in a way, coming home to yourself, owning that I'm my own person now.
Yeah, because it's a reminder. It's not like a new thing. The song doesn't go, oh, this is a new thing that I'm learning. It's connecting in with something you already know. Sorry, carry on.
No, that's good. We're carrying on that train of thought because where I'm thinking about is like, how do we, part of Rashid's question, I think underlying that is then like, how do we move people towards that realization? Maybe that's presumptuous. How do we move people? But this song, this artwork caused something for you. Because some people would say, that's just the way it is. Man's got to eat. What would you have me do rather?
Yeah.
Certainly. Sure. I don't know how to necessarily ask that question. I mean, I know in my instance, there's a pre-existing mulching, for me anyway, that happened around like values, around purpose in the world. I don't know why that music would necessarily affect me in that way, but that's one of the things I can think of to say why. Also, I didn't always fit in. Like, I'm an amalgamation of outliers.
I love that. An amalgamation of outliers, yeah.
Like growing up at a time when there wasn't a lot of visibility around gayness. And then, but here there's this inner little le jaboutois. Sorry, I love saying that. I love saying that.
So what does that mean? Le jaboutois.
Just to get to le jaboutois.
Your turn of phrase is brilliant.
It's gorgeous, isn't it? But so that's one outlier. And then there's the other outlier around as loving as my family context was and is. Patriarchy was also a system that it wasn't set up in a way for me to benefit from per se. So as a woman, I was already like on the back. And then apartheid, so that's what I kind of say, like I kind of feel like I grew up as an amalgamation of outliers. Then at the age of 8, I leave a homogenous, predominantly Xhosa, Ghanaian, colored, and then white. That was like the kind of setup in Umtata, but predominant. When I say homogenous, predominantly Xhosa, I leave that context and go to Makanda, where it's to go to a predominantly white school. So I think that moving across two worlds, like from quite a young age, I kind of went, oh, these systems are almost. First, I've seen that these systems are not fair, but then on top of which, systems are a little bit nebulous. You can change the rules and the parameters when you move from one space to another. So I think that also kind of contributes to starting to question, is the status quo really real? Which I think then opens you up to all of these other alternative narratives that kind of resonate with truth, if I can use that word.
When you say the question, is the status quo really real? I'm wondering about your usage of the term real. What do you mean by real exactly?
If I had believed apartheid, what the status quo of apartheid said, then I would have believed that I was less than. Lauryn Hill has a track called Black Rage, and she says Black Rage is founded on 2/3 a person. That's what all these dude. That's what the status quo of apartheid says. That wasn't real for me. Like, I grew up in a context that wanted to foster and nurture my growth, that said, no, I'm valued. So I guess my experience challenged the status quo. I guess that's what I mean by the status quo not being real. Similarly, if patriarchy says women are less than or weak or whatever the case may be, remember definitely as a child learning how to ride a bicycle. And like, if I ride it like how, air quotes, a boy does it, then I've got more balance and I can have more fun. And then I actually feel strong. And I'm going faster than the boys. So no, that's not real. You know, so there was already experientially something that that challenged the status quo as I was being told by messaging. Yeah.
It's almost like part of your life experience of, what was that term you used? About the
an amalgamation of
outliers. Of outliers, yeah. It's almost like part of that was because your reality was different in instances. It's almost like it was just naturally poking holes at the status quo and being like, no, but like, this thing's not actually real. We've been told that this is real. We've been told that this is the only way. Yeah. But then all of a sudden, your experiences, and as you've been exploring things like riding a bike, it's like, maybe there could be a different reality.
Exactly.
You know? Maybe there are other possibilities. Yeah. I often think about like even outliers and maybe even being on the margins of something. I also often think of that as like, to an extent, a liminal space. And perhaps what that space is it's this in-between space between this is the status quo, this is what exists, and then you have the outlier. Yeah. And then the other side is, that's actually a new world. Yeah. You know, different possibilities.
Yeah, no, definitely. So when you're crossing one world into another, when suddenly all of the variables and how they're configured are different, then I think that liminal space becomes a lot more accessible to you. And that's why we need liminal spaces. That's why I think we need to step outside of what we're told the bounds of reality are, because then it becomes easier to identify the nonsense that we otherwise kind of go, oh, this is true, this is real. Yeah.
I also heard you talking about traverse. There was the word I was thinking about was traversing, being able to go from one reality to another. So the if you go from Mthatha to Mkanda, they were different worlds that you went between.
Sure.
And actually in that act of going in between them, you were able to see things for what they were. That's very interesting for me.
Yeah, and I should have looked this up, but there is somewhere in the systems change literature this piece around two worlds, being able to move across worlds, or maybe not worlds, but social fields.
Yes.
Because you need a different toolbox. You need different ways of engaging when you're in the other social field.
Yeah.
So I think what it does is that it gives you a sense of transforming any system. It gives you a sense of possibility around that. You know?
I've always liked the word interlocutor as a person who occupies that. Like...
That's... Yeah. That's a word, like in academia they say like you mustn't use informant anymore. If I interview you for whatever, And then I mustn't use informants. Oh, my informant, Tristan Pringle.
Yeah.
I must say interlocutors, or the way
Yeah.
you said interlocutors.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
sorry.
But also,
just
I
laugh.
feel like that word's been captured by academia. So
It
use
is
it. So
that's why we were laughing.
Yeah, so
but
the
shame-
two academics in the room.
No,
I
No,
am
I'm
outside
not-
of the...
I'm not an academic.
Okay, but
please, from your context,
from my
the
point of
beauty,
view,
you can
and,
we'll
um,
uncapture it.
well, it's not about the word; it's the meaning, I guess.
Yes.
Yes,
We'll come
exactly,
up with a synonym. We'll come up with. Is there someone like that in Lord of the Rings?
What?
I don't know. A person goes between. I don't know. Anyway,
I don't know.
this idea that you can go between. Maybe this is a stretch, but for those of us who went to, say, I went to my neighborhood primary school,
Uh-huh.
and then went to the former Model C school across town.
Uh-huh.
And a similar discombobulating experience happens. There's a disruption, and you then figure out how to be in the one space and the other.
Yeah.
And if you're pursuing whiteness, which I think I did, then there's a
With
whole
your
other
skinny
story
jeans,
about that.
Your
hey?
teenager, your skinny jeans.
My
back in the-
skinny jeans.
Weren't you emo, bro?
5FM rock days.
Nah, I was the same.
So
We've bonded over that. We're like, oh, you also like that
you
band.
also, yeah, I also we won't name them. Some of them were here in Cape Town. But anyway,
Oh my gosh, I'm so curious right now. But okay, fine.
Yeah,
but
you should tell her about your guilty pleasure. He has a guilty pleasure.
Please.
Just tell her, and then we'll get back to your stuff.
well, it might be many of them, but which
Your
one?
particular group who you love, that Belleville Afrikaans rock.
Oh, Folk of Polisikan.
Sure.
That he loves them.
Sure.
He's
No.
I have
That's
a
cool.
whole
I
theory
respect
why,
that.
Yeah.
I respect that.
But we'll take that out of the recording.
No, we'll keep it, bro. That's staying, bro.
But for people like that, there is a skill set that you learn in doing that.
Yeah.
So with all of the caveats around, like the stuff I'm processing about some of my own heritage that whiteness forces you to forget, so that because you think you can escape your thing and then I can become white and do the things that my white friends do and have the benefits that they don't. But you can never get there, right? But there are some of us who, whether we like it or not, had experienced that. And I feel like there's a role to play for people like that, to be able to see the world for what it is because you've gone between places. And the part of the cost is there's a thing about coming home but then to where? Where is home then? Because you become this outlier in all of those spaces.
Yeah. Huh.
Which is the cost of being that person.
Yeah.
So when you say I'm an amalgamation of outliers, I don't have the same kinds of things that you mentioned as things of in which spaces you were outliers.
Yep.
But I have a list where I'm like, actually, yeah, I also feel like I'm an outlier in these different spaces,
Yeah.
and I resonate with that. But that outlierishness, that's a non-academic word.
Okay, we're back. Balance.
I think there's something there that we should explore
Definitely.
about like what that allows us to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
No, definitely. Because what happens is that when you move across, there's an unlearning that happens. You're like, oh, this thing wasn't real after all, right? And in order to change systems, we can't tear down the master's house using the master's tools, something like that.
Is that not Audre Lorde?
Audre Lorde. And I also misquoted the quote, but I think you get the gist. But when we move from one space to another, there's an unlearning that needs to happen. Even as you're taking up new and receiving the new information of the new space that you're in, there's a bunch of unlearning that needs to happen. Then we're open to learning new ways of building new systems, Yeah.
And to be clear, for me, getting into the former white school, I had to unlearn that was the ideal.
Yeah.
At some point, there was a reckoning with this way you were being socialized in high school and alienated from your culture. When you come, I'm guessing you're like mid-20s or something, when that processing is happening for me, there's like a thing where I'm like, actually, I was then lied to in that space.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I only was able to do that work because of that, being able to traverse worlds. I think that was a tool. And again, to my own detriment, probably, like there was a cost to that thing. There definitely are benefits because I speak with the expensive accent without Woolworths water or whatever. There are those things that are benefits to that, but there is a cost to it as well.
Definitely. you just made me think about how unlearning works. It can also come in surprising places. What I mean is that going to the white school, one of the things I got to unlearn by virtue of going to the white school was this thought, it's lifelong learning, but this thought that maybe I am 2/3 a person. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't grow up, and I mean, I'm a bit older than you guys, but I definitely remember as a kid kind of going, why is it set up that way? And you're a kid, you know, the grown-ups have constructed the world, so there's a part of you that considers it and takes it on, right? And yeah, you can either internalize it or externalize it. I know I definitely internalized it, but definitely one of the ways that unlearning happened to me in going to the white school was getting there and getting higher marks. That contributes. Do you know what I mean? So the unlearning happens in, because I'm like, oh, I get, if I'm like getting top marks in maths, I'm starting to question this thing of maybe I'm less than by virtue of my race. So yeah, the unlearning happens in a lot of different ways, I guess.
I resonate with that so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also resonate with the idea of the amalgamation, just in the sense of like existing as someone who's in between things. Obviously, I remember when we spoke to Tandi about it, she shared a similar thing about how her mom is white and her dad is black, and about someone who's mixed race. I think like when you mixed race, it's almost like you automatically see different things. On my side, it's also compounded. I don't mean compounded in a bad way, but in the fact that I've shared a couple of times, Ncedisa, I don't think you would know, but I'm on my mom's side, this is a white side. My mom's Jewish and the family's Jewish. And on my dad's side, my dad's Muslim and the family and colored and all of that. So like that idea of literally going between spaces, I have like a vivid memory of it. And I think it's because there was a friend from school that was with us that day. So I was thinking about it like a bit more self-conscious than I would usually. But she came with us to Manenberg, where we had Eid with my dad, and like a nice big family. And then I'm like looking at that space and existing in that space. And we drove, I think it was my dad and my uncle or something. They drove us through to my grandpa, through the suburbs. And my grandpa stayed in Clifton, a beachfront flat overlooking First Beach. And I remember that day quite clearly, because there weren't usually times where on a single day I would go from one space, which expresses part of my heritage, part of my lived experience, part of my ancestry, to what is actually almost like another extreme on the other side. Like just the fact that you are, like, for example, if you're in a Muslim family but you have a Jewish parent, immediately you're an outlier, because it's like, oh damn. If you're in a Jewish family and you have a Muslim parent, you're an outlier immediately. Not necessarily just in the family context, but even in the context of like if you go to a religious gathering or something like that, immediately, automatically you're an outlier. But at the same time, there's this guy who's an author, is a very cool guy from Canada, Rohadi, and he talks about how being an outlier or being something like that, it's also your superpower in another way, because you can see different sides of different stories. I think for me, a very, very important thing, particularly perhaps with some of what's going on in the world, in the Middle East, etc., is just like seeing as someone who, obviously the example I'm talking about is Palestine and Israel. I'm not Palestinian, I'm not Israeli, but there are these other narratives of Islam and Judaism that are overlapping in those conversations. And I guess being, in a way, existing in between two different like spaces and heritages and identities and stuff, there is a part of me that is just like, we are actually all human. And that humanizing thing, at the end of the day, perhaps it's like inherent for me to see the dehumanization, because I see that dehumanization in these examples over my own life. And it's also sometimes you need to now sort yourself out because you're like, yo, bro, I can't dehumanize myself. What's going on here?
Exactly.
Yeah, and obviously mine is quite particular examples, but perhaps even like the story of Manenberg to Clifton, even in like a context in Cape Town, that's why I'm like, no, we need to build a better city. We need to build one that's more just and equal and good for everyone. It just, to me, I'm like, anything else doesn't make sense to me, you know.
If we were to talk about in that direction of like a better city, maybe a better world. So, Ncedisa, you are a systems thinking practitioner. You're comfortable with that term.
I'll allow it.
The expert.
No one's an expert, except for you as a musician. But I wondered if you, maybe just as succinct, as brief as you can, like, tell us a bit about what is systems thinking as a thing.
Sure. I guess it's a set of frameworks and theories that make sense of the world as complex systems. And why I landed on the complex systems is that we tend to think that we live in a world of if this, then that, right? But that's not what we live in. You can go if this, but then a whole bunch of other things can happen.
Yeah.
And the mistake that we make is we treat the world as if it's an if this, then that world, when actually it's a very complex world that we live in. And systems thinking are frameworks and tools that we use and apply to the world to kind of shift our understanding to see it better.
That's good, because it's about the complexity.
It's thoroughly about the complexity.
So because for us to make sense of a incredibly complex world, and what you describe, for me, part of the language we need to speak is poetry. I'm biased because I write poetry, maybe.
Okay.
But when I say poetry, I also mean in a very broad way. You've been speaking about songs quite a lot.
Yeah.
And poetry is able to make sense of complexity in a very different kind of way.
Yeah.
Not necessarily logic, for example. But we are able to explain things like your one line from Tori, Amos, is able to explain a whole bunch of different things. And actually, if you come back to it, you see something new and something different. And that's just an interesting thing that I feel like happens. There's an interwovenness of these ideas. My follow-up question would be around, like, if that is what systems thinking is there like a powerful connection to be made with stories, or for example your love of music, like the power that music, you've quoted a couple of songs already, like if you think about the work you do, does songs connect us? Is songs helpful, or poetry, or stories in the broader term?
Look, for me it is. For you it might be poetry. For so, like, you know, it could be different forms. I think though what is universal about those different forms is where they actually intervene in us, where they intervene. Stories, poetry, a beautiful piece of art, it intervenes in here internally. It has an impact on you internally. It doesn't have an impact on someone else and they tell you how you should feel about it. So for me, that is like one of the most beautiful utilities or service that these kind of forms have for us when it comes to going, okay, how could we do things differently? Because it's so hard to hack my inner experience, but it's very easy to hack my outer experience, like what I'm earning, where I get to live, what car I drive. That's easy to hack, you know, if you have the power. What they do as well is that it doesn't give me this false comfort that I now understand the system. What it does is that it opens a door to, I have a sense of what to do. So even with the Tori Amos track, right? I didn't need to understand that, okay, these guys are in here because they bring money into the university and I didn't have to understand any of those things. What it did is it just settled a knowing of, okay, this is what I need to do. I need to give back the scholarship. and find another way of finishing my degree. With the systems change frameworks and the tools and all of that type of stuff, okay, what I also say is that it's not enough. The framework is almost like it's cool. It makes me make sense of the system that I'm working in and what I can do to make it better. It helps me make sense of it. But there's also sensibilities and ways of doing it that I also need, which are internally held. When I say those sensibilities, I mean, there's humility. That's a very necessary sensibility. There's teachability. So there's these sensibilities that go with the frameworks that are held internally that then, I think, give us quite a good first next right step kind of guidance.
That's like, I mean, this is fascinating. Yeah, I love this. That's like...
Okay, good, because I'm trying to read your face and
No,
I'm
no,
like, I don't know what's happening with these guys.
There's a lot of processing, connections being made for me as well. I'm thinking about the idea of like the personal is political,
Yeah.
that feminist statement.
Yeah.
Maybe I've been harping on about this now for a couple of episodes, but I'm thinking about the role of personal transformation
Yeah.
in systems change.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're saying when you approach the framework, when you're thinking about how to do these things, there's at least a posture that you have to
Yeah.
have. And if there's work to be done around how that posture is held, and that work is to be done by things like the intervention is like things like songs or story or poetry or whatever, that's fascinating for me because it means we can do something as poets and songwriters and
Definitely.
other art forms, you know?
Definitely. Not enough on its own.
Yeah.
But definitely can do stuff.
Yeah.
Perhaps the stories that are encompassed in songs and poems and everything, perhaps they can be part of those things that lead to that personal transformation that you're speaking about. Because I'm wondering, like, Tristan, you were talking earlier about how you were at this white school growing up with your skinny jeans and your rock music, which you still
We used to wear
listen
school uniform, bro. We didn't wear...
Nah, but on holiday.
And there was no school,
weekend.
skinny jeans wasn't in fashion. It was baggy jeans.
Baggy.
It was baggy jeans.
and then how you spoke about in your 20s, your mid-20s or whenever it was, that you had this change. Like, I'm wondering, I don't even know if you could go back, and maybe Ncedisa as well. I'm just wondering, like, in those examples, what are those things that lead individuals to say, you know what, I actually want to choose and pursue a better path? Because I see it so often, even you'll have two siblings, they grew up the same, it's the same thing, same story. And then the one is like, chasing whatever, and then the other's chasing a completely different thing or pursuing a completely different thing. There's a question you've asked before, Tristan, I can't remember exactly when it was, but maybe it's another question to bring forward again, like, what is it that leads you down better paths, if I can put it like that?
I'm really glad to hear that whole amalgamation of outliers resonated with both of you, because I think, I said I am. God, I don't think I'm unique. I think like we all are actually amalgamations of outliers. And what happens is, again, we conform to pressures to fit in. We conform to very real, big life and death pressures, and we start to ignore certain things or certain knowings that we have. For me, that reactivation of that amalgamation, I think is a very kind of influential thing in terms of kind of, that plays that tipping point role.
It's I'm thinking about the language like fracture. The fracture appears. There's a fracture there's something, for me, it's like there's a crack that you just kind of look into, and then as soon as you start looking behind it, it like unpeels layers. I think that's where sometimes what helps that crack appear is the art. So you were talking about Sinead O'Connor in our intro thing. Maybe you want to talk about one of the Sinead O'Connor songs just now, but the one that you had mentioned was Black Boys on Mopeds.
Yeah.
Black Boys and Mopeds.
Black Boys on Mopeds.
In that song, she says, England's not the mythical land of Madame George and roses. It's the home of police who kill black boys on mopeds. And I love my boy, and that's why I'm leaving. I don't want him to be aware that there's any such thing as grieving. And I'm like, wow, that's like, that's bars. That's... It's interesting that she wrote it so long ago, but like, we're still talking about like how police
Yep.
interact with black people,
Yep.
not just in England, but definitely in England as well. I don't know that I would come to that because of a debate that I had. I might come to that with like some reading or some, I don't know. We all function differently, but listening to a song makes it different. Like in those couple of lines, she's expressing something that is very human, fear for her boy, and the reality of talking about like the unreality. First of all, there's this like notion about England being a particular kind of way, all gentlemanly and civil or whatever. But underneath that, there's this other reality where police kill black boys on mopeds. I mean, she's done that in 4 lines.
4 lines. She's
It's
exposed
crazy.
empire.
That's, and she sang it then, but we're still talking about it now. It's still a truth that is there, you know. For me, that's part of what pulls back some of that fracture. There's something you can look into.
In those 4 lines, she described something that we saw, that I was seeing at home, you know, not with mopeds, but having grown up kind of knowing that police have this type of power over you that they can exert based on race. And the thing is, when you hear something that is true, I guess it's like a guitar string in your soul. It's like, you hear it. And, you know, in the same song, she also says, remember what I told you, if they hated me, they will hate you. Now, again, I didn't know the context of that song, but there's first those bars where it's like she's describing something I've seen, and then she's also saying there's patterning to this that I've also seen, you know, and it just gives a legitimacy to, as I say, this knowing, or at least it unlocks a very strong desire to question and just not take what the status quo is giving you at face value. I don't know if this is from the same album. I think it was the following album where she then has a track called Famine, and it was like early days of hip hop. It's thematically, it's like a very wooden kind of rap song. Like, did you listen to it?
I did.
Even when she raps, it's quite wooden. I'm like, ish. But the things that she says, like she starts off saying, okay, I want to talk about Ireland. Specifically, I want to talk about the famine, about the fact that there never really was one. And then she breaks down how England basically did to the Irish people what they did to us. So again, it just, and you know, you've got this nice kind of hip hop beat in the background. So you in your feels. So for me, it's as I say, it's the awakening of a desire to question and just not take at face value the thing that these systems that you already know you're an outlier to are saying you should just take at face value. The reason why I like to link narratives or music or poetry or any of that stuff to systems change is that we're trying to change systems and we're trying to make them better. But also there's systems are exerting this thing on us all the time, this thing that says, no, but align with my vector. Align with the vector that is oppressive, and I will reward you in this way, be it a salary or whatever, freedom of movement, whatever. If the system's trying to kind of co-opt my best intentions, even as an activist, I need a reminder, I need a touch point that will help me see when my best intentions have actually been co-opted by the system that I'm actually thinking I'm trying to fight. And again, that's why for me it's so important to keep narratives so close by, because I think they provide that touch point. Because as to what I was saying earlier, it's so much difficulter, also an academic word, for a system to hack my internal world than it is to hack my external world. so much more difficult. So that's why I need the narratives there.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so given what we've spoken about now, complexity of the world, there's this idea of like, there's some internal stuff that some personal transformation things almost that is part of creating a better world. There are these like systems change tools and things that can be used, and it's all super difficult and feels like a lot of effort, and at the same time there are these systems pushing against us, trying to act in the opposite direction, and at times it feels like we can lose hope quite quickly, like actually I don't know, like is it possible that things can change? And on the bad days it's like that this is that nothing's going to get better. And so a question would be like, where do you find hope at the moment in this year of 2025, as chaotic as it is?
I like to borrow this word, which I think came from our neurospicy brother and sisters, but it's glimmers, right? Which the way it was explained to me was that they're triggers, you know, that we understand in society, something that kind of triggers you into reliving a wounding. And then they're glimmers, which is kind of the opposite of triggers. And glimmers is something that triggers me into experiencing it doesn't have to be a euphoria, but maybe it's a joy. Maybe it's joy. And I'm saying this because we're talking about, you know, narratives and story and music, but I love those stories, those narratives, those moments where I'm triggered into experiencing and feeling or bearing witness to joy. Those are those glimmers of what's possible. Those moments as well. It's just such a beautiful reminder of our joy. We may be living in worlds that try to oppress, but it doesn't mean we cannot access joy. And I'm not saying that to bypass. I don't mean it in a bypassy kind of way. I think the point at which we give up on joy is the point when it's game over for us. You know, in some way.
Sure.
So I was reading this poem that someone had sent me a Substack that had some write-up, and then there was a poem attached to it. And the poem is called A Brief for the Defense, and it's by Jack Gilbert. And so it's this beautiful poem about why joy is important. And these lines stood out for me. It says, if we deny our happiness, resist our satisfaction, we lessen the importance of their deprivation. We must risk delight. We can do without pleasure, but not delight, not enjoyment. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To make injustice the only measure of our intention is to praise the devil. If the locomotive of the Lord runs us down, we should give thanks that the end had magnitude. We must admit there will be music despite everything. I just thought that was beautiful, and especially in this context, we're talking about music, that idea of like, at the end there will be music.
And also what it's just raised for me as well is that I've never really kind of paid attention to it, that the revolutionary kind of rehumanizing we're doing when we're kind of feeling into that joy, you know? It's reminding me of a quote, I don't know who it's by, but it says, joy is another form of wonder. And if you think about wonder reminds us that, okay, we're here, we're walking the earth, but even that, the things that we have and we're part of, they're not of our own making, guys, you know, at the end of the day, right? So it's kind of tipping me back into that gratitude, but with like a certain kind of flavor to it. So it just made me think of that as well. Like there's a beautiful humility as well in connecting with joy. There's a beautiful humility. It's a prayer almost.
Beautiful. I love what you were saying, that the things that are not of our making, So just for context for those who are listening, it's a hot day today, hey? Very hot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Guys.
we've kind of had the door open for a bit of time, but then the neighbor started making noise, listening to some song. So I closed the door, then it got hot. When I opened it again, I think it will come through in the recording. I don't know if either of you heard, but there was this little bird tweeting, and it was as we started talking about joy. In a way, a lot of what I was hearing when you were speaking was about like maybe even returning to joy as a rehumanizing thing as well.
Yeah.
So if the system says no, you dehumanized. It's like saying, okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to remember and lean into rehumanizing things that remind me that I'm human. And for me, part of I love like nature and existing in a world where there's birds that tweet and those kind of things. Like those things can bypass us, and we're too busy focused on taking down systems that we forget that part of that experience is also belonging in ourselves. That for me was a little bit of that. When I was listening to that bird, it was a little bit of that. She's been everybody else's girl, let me say everybody else's boy, but maybe one day I'll be my own. For me, part of that would be, yo, there's a bird. Yo, that bird has a cool tone, bro. Look guys doing the vibe. Look at singing, you know. Part of me, and in my experience and in how I operate in the world, is things like that, remembering that.
It's beautiful.
Can I answer this question? Can stories change systems?
Go for it. We didn't know. We weren't sure if we were ever going to answer that question.
We first had it as a statement.
We had it as a statement,
and then we
thought that's a
chickened
bit
out.
presumptuous.
So we said,
Let's give it a go.
Look, or I'm offering a perspective. It's not the complete. So can I offer a piece of the answer?
Yes.
Please, yeah.
I think we build systems out of the narratives that we hold,
exactly.
right? And so many of our systems are based on dehumanizing narratives. If you look at apartheid, if you look at capitalism, if you look at, with capitalism, capital is valued more than labor, right? That's the story that capitalism tells. And that gap is getting wider and wider every day. So we build these systems off of dehumanizing narratives. I think stories that are grounded in rehumanizing narratives empower us to begin to start to build systems that are generative instead of extractive. Systems that can distribute wealth and well-being more equitably than the ones that we live in, and also systems that are constantly learning about themselves so they can continue to improve, I guess, to get better at distributing that wealth more equitably. So that's the role I think stories and narratives have towards transforming systems. I do 100% think they can't do it on their own, right? For example, if we look at Fees Must Fall, that was a legitimate conversation a lot of students were bringing to that conversation. Those students who were bringing to that conversation, fees must fall, patriarchy must fall. I mean, that was a legit conversation around, look at all these isms that are imbued into our most colonial universities in South Africa, So the story of protest, though, needed other interventions to happen in order for that beautiful innovation that the students were bringing, in order for the broader system to actually take it on and use it to become better universities, better designed to foster curiosity as opposed to what they are now.
The students were telling a certain story. There was a narrative, at least, they were presenting.
Yeah,
which would have been a counter narrative to... So apart from the protest...
Yeah.
So I think stories might even precede the protest. There's at some point there's a story that gets people onto the street. I'm going to put my body on the street because I believe the story.
Yeah.
And so in that way, there's an acknowledgement about stories precedes these things. Those other things that must happen.
Yeah.
Because without the story, we're not gonna move.
There's no
students had to become convinced that things were so wrong. that we are willing to risk the academic project
Yeah.
for this thing. We believe in it so much.
Yeah.
And I think groups like Roadmap 4 did a really good job at framing that for students, for other students, because not
Definitely.
everyone would have been on the same page. Still, everyone wasn't on the same page at the end, but there were people who could resonate with the story that, oh, we're making connections to the painting on the wall, and that the curriculum is not matching up, and that the fees are not working.
Yeah.
And I think there's the power of stories, like in that beginning bit of when we're talking about how do we get mobilized, maybe, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think, though, there is also a power in the beginning bit, but we need to retell them.
The retelling.
We need to retell them. And as I say, that kind of, for me, plays that kind of, not a touch point of coherence. As Xhosa people, we introduce ourselves by our clan, our clan name. There's also a little story. So this is my ancestor, his name is Ukwatsi, and there's a story associated with it, right? So for me personally, the story that goes is that the translation is, he rubbed up against the ocean until he becomes it.
Wow.
Which for me, when I remind myself that that's where I come from, there's just as I'm going about the daily whatever thing that I'm doing, there's again a gorgeous power there that I think lends strategic coherence and integrity to what it is that I'm here to do. I think there's a lot of importance in retelling the stories and changing them when we need to.
That's beautiful. Cool. Well, that was brilliant.
Alrighty.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Ncedisa, it was beautiful.
Fun.